there will not be, nor is there a need for another new Pokemon type. What's going on, everybody? T Flame here, and today I just want to talk about why I don't think there will be, nor is there a need for another Pokemon type. Just because I see a lot of fan gamers and stuff like that, or fans of the games talk about new types and how cool it would be and whatnot. And while you could argue new types would be cool, the point of new types needs to be at the forefront of someone's mind, and typings have to inherently make sense for and just saying that some would be cool, which that's my justification for playing Pokemon, because I like to see cool monsters fight. When you really break down the ideas of a new type, it really doesn't make sense. There isn't really, like, if someone says we need a new type, it doesn't make sense, and there isn't a need for a new type. The main reason is, number one, I'll start basic. I'll start with a basic, and then we'll break it down. And as we start breaking it down, you'll see why there's less and less reasons for a new Pokemon type. So, the first things first, if a new type is introduced, it would have to be 2 new types. Mainly because why? We have 18 types. If a new type was introduced, you would have 19, and that is very uneven, and it doesn't sit right. You'll have all these types laid out, and then you just have that one at the bottom, the new one. So, inherently, to keep things round, there would have to be a new type. Now, granted, there was a long period of time where there was 17 types. And so Game Freak did have an uneven. You did have 17 types before Fairy was introduced. However, with the Fairy type introduced, it's a lot more round, and 18 types it's even, and it's nice in appearance. So adding one type, 19 is such an awkward number that if a type was introduced, there pretty much, I think, would have to be 2 new types introduced. It's already unlikely that one type is going to be introduced, so to try and think of a way to have 2 to keep it round, anyway. But let's just say Game Freak is like, let's introduce 2 types, right? Or let's say, let's play with the idea of introducing 2 new types. The top 2 types people always talk about is the Light type and the Sound type. Both of those do not make sense inherently as Pokemon typings. Number one, the Sound typing. I think the Sound typing is a lot more popular than the Light type, but both of them are pretty talked about a lot. The Sound type does not make sense because Pokemon already have sound-based moves, and to make a Sound type would inherently mean that sound-based moves would have to become a Sound type. Like, you see, the difficulty of understanding a Sound type is that it wouldn't mean that it would have too much thought processes and whatnot to go behind it. When Fairy was introduced, a lot of moves like Charm, I think, was previously in the game, or whatever. Fairy moves, there weren't significant changes in moves to make them Fairy type, right? What's not like we had, we have Torch Song, we have Primarina signature move, which is a sound-based move. We have Hyper Voice, Boom Burst. The Sound type, I think, would argue that normal moves that are sound-based would become sound-type moves. But then it doesn't make sense when you have a lot of other moves that are sound-based. And not only that, sound-based moves have a particular effect in battle in which they go behind things like Substitute. Substitute does not block sound-based moves, which is a unique effect that is tied to any move that is sound-based. So if there's a Sound type, would that mean these types of moves would have that stripped away and it'd go to the Sound type? I would say the Sound type would have a chance, would be interesting as a type if Sound wasn't already inherently a part of Pokemon. Like, it's a little bit more of a niche thing, but Sound is in Pokemon, right? Sound has an impact, right? We have a lot of sound-based moves, and they have unique impacts in battle. And so to have a type would conflict with an already established, like, part of Pokemon. But let's go to the Light type. And I think the Light type is in conflict with Pokemon as well, because the Light type would imply this would go to Pokemon that could produce light. So Ultra Necrozma would probably be like Light Dragon, right? Electricity Pokemon could be light whatever. But the thing is about light that doesn't make sense is because every Pokemon in existence that has a connection to light is tied to some sort of elemental light type joint. So electricity Pokemon have light because electric. Certain fire Pokemon can produce light because of fire. Ultra Necrozma is some celestial being that can just produce light because of like its lore, right? Pretty much every Pokemon that can produce light has some sort of reason as to why. To create a light type would mean that a Pokemon can produce light just because. And you see how that's kind of like problematic, because a lot of Pokemon is very intentional with their designs. And so if a Pokemon can produce light, it's made clear, whether it be psychic or specific parts on the body, right? And to make a light type would mean a lot of Pokemon that are psychic type would have to become light type, and it would remove the uniqueness of how certain Pokemon can produce light. Like when you see the move Flash, sometimes in the anime, when you see a Pokemon use a move Flash, you see it glow, and that's interesting because you see how that Pokemon is able to produce light, right? I would say though the alternative to the light type, because rather the light type is basic. It would say like it would assume that Pokemon can produce light just because, and it's a light type. That's very basic. But there are a significant amount of light-based moves like Flash, and I think certain like electric moves and whatnot. I'd say a buff that they could do is if Pokemon have a move that is inherently tied to light, maybe make it so it can bypass things like light screen, or maybe both light screen and reflect. I think that'd be interesting to have a move like that. Make light Pokemon based effect similar to sound, because sound is like things like Boom Burst and Hyper Voice and stuff like that go behind Substitute. Make it to where light can go behind things like screens, or maybe light based moves ignore the effect of terrain or something like that. Maybe light based moves have 100% accuracy in the sun. Maybe, I don't know. But yeah, I just want to break down why I think there's not going to be another Pokemon type. I've seen also some people, fans create, I'd say the third most requested type, I think, is like the rubber type. I haven't seen that around a lot, but I've seen people talk about the rubber type, and that just does not make sense. Inherently, because a Pokemon being rubber, that doesn't make sense. It's like if there was a plastic type, like I can't really see that making sense, because it doesn't make sense to me. But anyway, let me know your thoughts down below. If you disagree and like to tell me a reason why there should be a light or a sound type, let me know. But I was just thinking, and as I break down the ideas of a light and the sound type, they just don't hold up, nor do they make sense. Because like I said, with the sound type, sound-based moves already exist in Pokemon. So if you create a type, it creates a conflict where it's like, do all sound-based moves have to become the sound type? Or do certain moves like Boom Burst, if Boom Burst becomes a sound-based type, a lot of normal type Pokemon lose stab on Boom Burst, and then it's like you wouldn't make something like the Dunsparce. The Dunsparce wouldn't be a sound-based Pokemon, but you would take away Boom Burst from it. I'm just thinking, when you think about it, it doesn't really make that much sense. Could Pokemon introduce a new type? Sure, I guess. I mean, hell, who knows? 20 years from now, we'll be talking about a super crazy type. But I do say that fans do create some interesting types. Like I've seen like the concept for the radioactive type in like certain Pokemon games, and I think that's interesting. But a lot of the things, like if you look at something radioactive, if it was in Pokemon would make that Pokemon a poison type, maybe poison psychic or something like that, you see. And a lot of moves are elemental based. Granted, Fairy is inherently elemental, but the way the type chart flows, it just makes sense. And not only that, when you look at a type, types have always been introduced to balance competitive Pokemon or just the Pokemon game overall. That has always been the main point of introducing new types. Dark and Steel were introduced in Gen 2 to counter Psychic, and Fairy was introduced to not only nerf dragons, but it gave poison type moves a lot more viability. But attacking poison types have always been bad. A lot of Pokemon wouldn't want poison type moves if it wasn't stab, because why? And then being an offensive poison type wasn't really like a thing prior to Gen 6. Like for example, Gengar would run Shadow Ball, and I guess, well, obviously it didn't run any of those moves prior to Gen 4 because they were all physical moves. But when you think about a new type, I mean, you have to inherently point to a flaw, and like, would it be like, you could say, oh, fairy types are strong, but fairy types aren't nearly as powerful compared to steel types prior to, you know, Gen like steel types were powerful because they had all those resistances. Then they nerfed it with taking away steel resistances in Gen 6. Steel no longer resists dark and ghost. So, you know, I would try to think, you'd have to think of a way for like, there'd have to be an inherent problem with one particular type, and specifically with racialization, we're seeing the strengths of a lot of types which are, you know, water, fairy, and stuff like that. But the thing is that it's not to the point where if you're a water type, you're inherently broken. You know, it's not like water types run the meta. It's you know, there isn't really a huge need for a balance change, and that's what type introductions are always centered around. And I think the typing matchups are as balanced today as they've ever been. If you want to, you can get to type combinations. Certain combinations of types are kind of crazy, but the thing is, that's type combinations. It's not necessarily an inherent individual type. And, you know, introducing a new, like, I'm not sure what a new type would, like, effectiveness do. Like, if you introduced a new type that was effective against other Pokemon and it didn't inherently have, like, a metagame balance at mind, it's like, what's the point? And yeah, I'm having trouble to also think what would sound be super effective against? I think maybe, like, fighting types? Maybe bug types? I'm thinking fighting types because, like, I don't know, maybe, like, sound disrupt, and I don't know. Maybe having an impact on like you got to think about it. There's not like in fairy types and lower are effective against dragons, but weak to poison and steel weapons. Like there's some, and now there are some type matchups you could say that don't really make sense, but still, if anything, saying that like ice should always be super effective against water. But when it comes to sound and light, it's hard to like contextualize what those types would mean and if it's needed, because if it's super effective against something, that's great, but it's like, is that inherently needed in the meta? And that's you know, the big question. Like obviously the light type would be super effective against dark, but it's like, just dark types already are weak to fighting and fairy, two really common offensive typings. Adding a third, like, is that needed? Anyway, I've ranted long enough. I hope y'all let me know in the comment section down below what y'all think. I just want to get on here and tell y'all what I thought. And yeah, thank y'all so much for checking out the video. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year. I think we're on track to hit it, but we can only hit it with your help. Thank you so much. I'll see y'all in the next video. Peace.